Kuno wasn't your average kid. Born into a vibrant fantasy world, he carried a mark of destiny right on his face, the hero's scar. It's an incredibly rare mark, bestowed upon him by a holy knight, but it came with a devastating price, the total and permanent loss of his eyesight. Growing up in darkness, Kuno's world was built on descriptions. He'd often ask his parents what seeing actually felt like. His father, ever the colorful storyteller, described it as the ability to perceive colors and all the beauty God placed in the world. He even added, with a bit of a wink, that sight is vital if you ever plan on finding big goth baddies. His mother took a more stoic approach, insisting that losing his eyes was a small price to pay for the prestige of the hero's scar. While his parents saw destiny, the household staff saw a tragedy. Kuno constantly overheard the maids whispering in pity, which drove him crazy. He didn't want to be a poor, blind boy. He just wanted to be treated like any other kid. Things took a turn when his parents hired a magic instructor. Kuno was skeptical. How is a blind kid supposed to master the mystic arts? As a maid led him to meet his new tutor, Kuno vented his frustration, questioning the point of magic when he couldn't even walk across a room without someone holding his hand. The maid, however, offered a different perspective. She pointed out the water crest on his forehead, a sign of immense magical affinity. She believed that if he mastered water magic, he could do wonders for himself and the world. Kuno wasn't fully convinced, but he kept his mouth shut as the door opened to reveal his new tutor, a blue-haired nerd baddie named Jen. The first lesson was surprisingly simple. Kuno had a natural knack for it, immediately managing to manifest enough moisture to get his staff wet. When he asked what he'd actually done, Jen explained he'd summoned a blob of water roughly the size of an eyeball. That specific description triggered a light bulb moment for Kuno. He grabbed his face in excitement, momentarily terrifying Jen, who worried she'd accidentally offended a woke snowflake. But Kuno's mind was elsewhere. He reasoned that if he could create water blobs the size of eyeballs, he could eventually craft his own set of magical eyes. It's a bit of a stretch, but hey, that's anime logic for you.
As time passed, Kuno's emo phase began to fade. He started finding joy in the world around him, becoming fascinated by the textures of objects, the variety of flavors in his food, and the different scents filling his room. One afternoon, he was found happily chowing down on lettuce, though he had no idea what it actually was until a maid explained it to him. The staff noticed the change too. The maid mentioned how much more rewarding it felt to prepare food for him now that he was truly engaged with his senses. She even began a sensory exercise, rubbing blueberries on his face to help him distinguish different sensations. His education wasn't just limited to magic. Soon, a new tutor named Flora, described as a total mommy, arrived to teach him history. Kuno specifically requested to learn about the legendary holy knight, Hugh. Flora was hesitant at first, knowing that the very reason Kuno was blind was due to a curse associated with that knight. But with the maid's approval, she began the tale. Kuno learned the heavy history of his world. A brutal war once raged between demons and humanity was on the verge of total defeat. The hero Hugh emerged, eventually ending the Demon King's tyranny and bringing peace to the land. However, the Demon King left Hugh with a spiteful parting gift, a bloodline curse. In every generation of Hugh's descendants, children are born missing something, be it a leg, their teeth, or in Kuno's case, their eyes. Society views these disabled descendants as reincarnations of the hero, honoring them because they bear the hero's scar. Kuno, however, wasn't interested in being a symbol or a loner of a dead hero's legacy. He viewed himself as his own person and his magic as his own power. This fueled his daily practice. He pushed himself relentlessly to master his skills, still dreaming of the day he could manifest his own magical eyes. But this level of training took a massive toll. Kuno's mana and stamina were constantly reaching their limits, often leaving him collapsed on the ground. Frustrated by his physical weakness, he realized he needed to bulk up. His maid, Aiko, reminded him that he was only 7 years old and suggested that gear and sword training might be the key to increasing the stamina he needed for high-level spellcasting. Aiko quickly tracked down an old swordsman named Oruru. Kuno threw himself into the basics of swordsmanship, and by the time Jen arrived for their magic lesson later that day, he was exhausted but determined. Jen was skeptical about how much he could have retained while being so tired, but Kuno shocked her. Instead of the single water ball they had practiced, he effortlessly manifested 10 perfectly clear ones. It was clear to Jen. This kid was definitely built different. That afternoon, Kuno received a high-profile visitor from the royal capital, the princess herself, Miri. Because Kuno was of noble birth and bore the hero's scar, the two had been betrothed since he was born. Mary wasn't exactly thrilled about the arrangement. Her previous visits left her dreading a future with a broody mofo who was always in an emo state and refused to play games. However, she was in for a shock. Instead of a moping kid, she was greeted by a Kuno who smiled warmly and welcomed her to the mansion. When she asked what changed, he explained that he'd fallen in love with magic and found a new purpose. He apologized for his past behavior and showed off his progress by manifesting a water ball. To really riz her up, he even used the water to create a beautiful rainbow, which was a total hit with the princess. They spent the rest of the day in the garden trading stories until sunset. Inspired by his meeting with Miri, Kuno approached Flora the next day, asking to learn the mannerisms of a gentleman. He wanted to be a better partner for his future bride, and Flora was impressed enough to start teaching him noble courtesy. Even his magic teacher, Jen, was stunned by his new formal demeanor. Seeing his growth, Jen decided it was time to move beyond basic spells. She explained that complex magic involves altering components like viscosity, color, and temperature. She tested him with 2 water balls, one warm and one cold. Kuno grasped the concept instantly. He produced a water ball, plopped it into a cup, and had Aiko take a sip. To everyone's amazement, the water tasted exactly like apple juice. Jen was internally smashed by this. She had spent a sleepless night coming up with this lesson, only for him to master it in seconds. That night, Kuno sat in bed with a red and a green apple, pondering the nature of color. He knew that while he understood taste and scent, he still didn't understand color. He knew that until he cracked this code, he'd never be able to create his magical eyeballs. The breakthrough came at breakfast the next morning. After a confusing request for milk tea without the milk, Kuno sent a water ball toward Aiko and had a sudden realization. He had been feeling textures his whole life. What if those textures were what others called colors? He picked up an apple and asked if it was red. Aiko told him it was green. He tried another and she confirmed it was red. Using his sense of touch, Kuno correctly identified that the basket contained 3 red and 2 green apples. He had figured out how to feel the difference in color through his fingers. Aiko was so shocked she ran to tell his father the news. When asked if Kuno could now read, Aiko explained he could trace the color of the ink on the paper with his fingertips. The following morning, Kuno was back to his magical grind, summoning a massive water ball and dyeing it red. He reasoned that a larger surface area would make the color easier to sense. However, his mother interrupted his focus, causing the giant red sphere to collapse and drench them both. Seeing her son covered in red liquid, she fainted, convinced he was covered in blood. Aiko had to step in and explain the confusion, noting that the color of blood is indeed red. Watching from the sidelines, Jen was floored. Kuno's feats were so advanced she began to wonder if he was destined to become a Cerulean wizard, the most prestigious title in the magical world. As the days rolled on, Kuno shifted his focus to hydromancy, the art of using water for divination or finding lost objects. When Aiko jokingly asked if he could find her a husband, Kuno turned on the charm, telling her a beautiful woman like her would have no trouble finding a groom. He even teased that if he weren't already betrothed to a princess, he'd marry her himself. Despite the 10-year age gap, Kuno casually brushed it off, claiming age is just a number. Kuno's academic progress was equally staggering. He passed Flora's history tests with flying colors, providing answers so politically correct they wouldn't even get him canceled on Instagram. Flora began to worry she had taught him noble manners too well, as he was now using his riz to flirt with every girl he encountered. One chilly night, Kuno's father requested a meeting at the main mansion. As Kuno and Aiko walked through the cold, Kuno used his magic to create warm, soft water blobs for Aiko to press against her face for warmth. He was nervous, fearing his father was still angry about the garden blood incident where his mother fainted. Aiko reassured him, and upon arrival, they were greeted by the house butler and Kuno's older brother, Ixio.
Ixio was stunned at the transformation in his brother. He remembered a time when Kuno was a gloomy emo kid who needed a hand to guide him everywhere. But now Kuno navigated the hallways with total confidence, sensing his environment through magic. Inside the Solar, Kuno's father dropped a bombshell. Flora had finished her curriculum, and it was time for Kuno to attend a formal school. Kuno initially resisted, not wanting his disability to be a burden to others. His father surprisingly agreed that formal education was for normies, but explained it was a legal requirement for nobles. Through a heavy dose of nepotism, his father had struck a deal with the king. Kuno would only have to attend school 5 times to take the advanced level exams and graduate. To sweeten the deal, Ixio and Princess Mary would be taking the same exams. With the plan set, Aiko began taking measurements for Kuno's new school coat, while his father gave Ixio a secret mission: protect Kuno and Mary from any rival nobles looking for trouble at the academy. The day of the big debut finally arrived. Kuno looked absolutely dashing in his new cape and custom cane, striking a few poses before boarding the carriage. Ever the innovator, he used his water magic to coat the wheels in a thin liquid layer, making the ride to the academy perfectly smooth. Ixio was impressed, while Kuno joked that his magic was far more useful than a degree in anthropology. As they approached the gates, Ixio couldn't help but notice his brother was sounding less like a hero's reincarnation and more like a budding demon king. At the academy, Princess Mary was already waiting. Kuno immediately turned on the charm, flirting with his fiancée, while a disgruntled Ixio stood awkwardly by. Though the sheer number of voices and presences initially overwhelmed Kuno's heightened senses, he found his confidence through magic and marched into the school holding Mary's hand. He was an instant hit with the female students, who thought he looked like a prince straight out of a storybook. Kuno was assigned to Professor Cast for his orientation. During their walk, he bluntly pointed out that his presence there was a blatant case of nepotism between his father and the king. A flustered Cast pleaded with him to keep his woke activism out of her hair and handed him his first exam paper. After finishing the test, Kuno and Mary headed to the dining hall, only to be intercepted by Prince Lyle, Mary's 6th-born brother. Lyle was furious that Kuno's popularity was overshadowing his own. Sensing Mary's tension, Kuno decided to humble the prince. He secretly gathered moisture and soaked the prince's trousers, making it look like he'd had a bathroom accident in front of everyone. While Lyle retreated in shame, Ixio panicked about the political fallout of making an enemy of a royal. Kuno, unfazed, simply went back to his burger. Later, Mary explained the hierarchy. She was the 9th princess, but her engagement to the bearer of the hero scar was making her social status skyrocket, which terrified Lyle. Kuno promised to be a partner she could be proud of, though he playfully noted he'd never kneel before another man, except maybe her father, in gratitude. Before his final exam, Kuno did one last training session with Jen. He froze a water blob and manipulated its texture to feel exactly like an apple. Jen encouraged him to touch more things to refine his magic. Taking this literally, Kuno spent his final school morning diddling a horse and a pigeon to understand their textures. When it came time for the group exam, Kuno was excited to finally experience real school life. He even chatted with Professor Cast about her tragic love life, much to the concern of Ixio and Mary, who wondered why a teacher was trauma dumping on a child. Just as the final exam was about to begin, Prince Lyle stormed over, pushing Kuno and Miri aside. He was fuming because rumors of his accident had reached the palace, making him the laughingstock of the servants. To everyone's shock, Kuno didn't back down. Instead, he grabbed the prince's hand in a vice-like grip to introduce himself properly. Lyle tried to act woke, claiming he never gave consent for the physical contact, but Kuno leaned into the chaos, telling the prince he had manly hands and jokingly suggesting he wanted them around his throat. The absurdity of the moment broke the tension, sending the entire class, and even Miri, into fits of laughter as the prince blushed in pure embarrassment. With the drama resolved, the exams were finalized, and Professor Cast announced that everyone had passed. Kuno celebrated his graduation alongside his brother and fiancée, leaving the school as a charming, quirky legend who had even managed to earn a bit of begrudging respect from Lyle. Back at the estate, magic lessons with Jen reached a staggering new level. Kuno wasn't just making water balls anymore. He created a small typhoon, split it into 10 parts, and changed their colors and textures on command. He even manifested a white water pigeon that flew with lifelike precision. Realizing her student had officially surpassed her, Jen tearfully admitted she had nothing left to teach. Kuno tried to flex his wealth by offering a salary raise to keep her, but Jen stayed honest, admitting she'd been overpaid for a while and needed to go improve her own skills. The departures didn't stop there. Flora also resigned, her noble curriculum complete. Even Aiko, his loyal maid, mentioned she was looking for a husband so she could retire before the dating pool got any worse. Seeing his support system moving on, Kuno realized he needed a master-level mentor. He set his sights on Zo, the royal sorcerer. When his father explained that royal sorcerers don't just take house calls for commoners, Kuno proposed a classic anime plot plan. He would go to the palace with his father, get lost, and use his plot armor to ensure the royal sorcerers found him and took him in as an apprentice. His father told him to stop watching so many K-dramas, but eventually caved to his wife's pleas and agreed to talk to the king. The gamble seemed to pay off. In the final moments, a master sorcerer at the palace opened Kuno's file. Though initially skeptical of an apprentice seeking such a high-level tutelage, the master became intrigued after reading the details of Kuno's unique abilities and his connection to Princess Miri. Kuno's journey into the highest circles of magic was just beginning.